The sound of the gavel echoed through the small community hearing room, sharp and cold like the crack of a whip. "Mr. Carter," the chairman of the host said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you've been found in violation of our community policy. Hunting within 3 miles of residential borders is strictly prohibited. As a result, the association has issued you a fine of $5,000. For a moment, silence hung in the room. Every pair of eyes turned to him, some curious, some smug, a few uncomfortable, but unwilling to speak. Darius Carter sat there, his jaw set, his eyes burning but steady. He didn't shout. He didn't slam his fist against the table the way some men might. He just leaned back in his chair, broad shoulders relaxed, as if the verdict didn't weigh on him at all. Inside, though, his chest felt like it was tightening. Not because of the money, he could handle that, but because of the way they looked at him. Like he was some intruder in land his family had hunted for generations. Like he was an outsider who didn't belong, even though his roots in this soil went deeper than most of theirs combined. A woman in the back whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Figures. Always breaking rules." Another chuckled under her breath. Darius slowly rose to his feet. His deep voice carried across the room. $5,000, huh? He let the words hang. "You think a man putting food on his table, on his own land, deserves to be punished like a criminal? It's not about food," the chairman snapped. "It's about rules. Rules keep order. And when people like you decide you're above them," Darius's eyes narrowed. "People like me?" The chairman shifted uncomfortably but didn't back down. "You knew the policy. You chose to ignore it. That's the bottom line." Darius stared at him for a long moment, then turned toward the crowd. His voice softened, but there was steel beneath it. "My father taught me how to hunt on that land. His father taught him. We respected it. We cared for it. And none of you had a problem until you saw me walking back with a deer over my shoulders." A hush fell over the room. Some folks looked away, guilt flickering in their eyes. Others stiffened, unwilling to admit the truth he just laid bare. Darius gathered his coat, slid it over his arm, and gave the room one last look. "You can keep your fine," he said quietly. "But just remember, land remembers who respects it, and who doesn't." Then he walked out, leaving whispers in his wake. Outside, the cold autumn air hit his face, sharp and biting. He stood there for a moment on the courthouse steps, watching the leaves swirl in the wind. He thought about his father, how the man used to bring him out into the woods before dawn, how they'd wait in silence together, breathing slow, respecting the rhythm of the earth. Hunting wasn't just about food. It was about tradition, dignity, survival. Now, these people who jogged through trails with bottled water in hand thought they had the right to strip that from him, to find him like a trespasser on his own ancestral grounds. His fists clenched. Then, slowly, he exhaled, letting the anger settle into something colder, sharper. By the time he reached his truck, an idea had already started to take root. The next morning, Darius drove out to the very land that had sparked all this. The rolling stretch of forest just beyond the community, where tall oaks and pines framed the trails the whole prized so much. He parked his truck, boots crunching against the frosted earth, and walked deep into the woods. The air was still, the kind of quiet that makes a man feel like he's standing at the center of something sacred. He stood there for a long time, hands on his hips, scanning the horizon. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. They thought they'd embarrassed him. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he wasn't just a hunter. He was also a businessman. And while they played small games with fines and rules, he played with deeds, contracts, and land titles. As the sun rose, Darius made himself a promise. He would not let this insult go unanswered. Not by shouting, not by begging, but by moving in silence, just like his father had taught him in the woods. Later that week, he drove 2 hours out to meet with a real estate lawyer he trusted. They sat in a quiet office, the lawyer flipping through documents. "You're serious about this?" the man asked, raising his brows. "That tract of land, those trails, they belong to a private trust right now. The whole leases them for community use. Buying it would cost you a fortune. Darius leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. I'm not asking if it's expensive. I'm asking if it's possible. The lawyer studied him for a moment, then nodded. It's possible, but it'll rattle cages. Those folks won't like it one bit. A slow smile spread across Darius's face. Good. For weeks, Darius worked quietly, pulling strings, moving money, making calls. Every handshake, every document signed was another arrow notched in his bow. He kept hunting on his family's land, but now each step through the forest carried a new kind of energy. He wasn't just a man under scrutiny anymore. He was a man on a mission. And yet, he told no one. Not his closest friends. Not even his sister, who usually knew everything about him. He wanted the reveal to come like a storm on a clear day. Sudden, unstoppable, undeniable. By the time winter rolled in, Darius had what he needed. The final papers sat in a neat folder on his desk, signed and stamped. With one stroke of a pen, the land those smug whole board members jogged through, held yoga classes on, and took pride in, belonged to him. And the first thing he planned to do was shut it down. But he wasn't ready to show his hand just yet. Not until the timing was perfect. So when the Hoe sent him another letter in January, a notice demanding immediate payment of his unresolved fine, Darius just smiled as he folded it neatly and tucked it away. They thought they'd cornered him. They thought they held the power. They had no idea what storm was coming. The January snow had fallen heavy, blanketing the neighborhood in crisp white silence. Kids built snowmen along the sidewalks, and couples trudged through the community trails with steaming cups of coffee in hand. To anyone else, it looked like a peaceful suburb wrapped in winter charm. But Darius Carter knew better. Underneath all that pretty snow lay the same cold hostility that had been aimed at him since the day he moved in. The second notice from the Hoe arrived in a crisp white envelope, slipped neatly into his mailbox like some formal insult. The letter was worded with precision, each line colder than the next. Immediate payment required. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Community privilege is subject to suspension. Darius read it once, then again before laughing to himself. Community privileges, he muttered, tossing the paper onto the counter. As if I ever needed their permission to live free. Still, the weight of it lingered. They weren't just fining him. They were trying to humiliate him, to make him bend. He could see it in the way some neighbors avoided his eyes at the grocery store, or the way others smirked when they jogged past his house in the early mornings. They thought they were breaking him down. One Saturday, his sister Nicole stopped by, bundled in a long gray coat, her curls tucked under a knit hat. She didn't even bother with small talk. Darius, what's going on? Folks are saying the HOA is about to take you to court. They're bluffing, he said calmly, flipping through some papers at the table. Bluffing or not, your name's all over their gossip chain, she pressed. People whispering at church, at the gas station, even at Mama's old diner. You really just gonna sit here and let them do that to you? Darius leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. His eyes softened at the mention of their mother's diner, the little place where they both worked summers growing up. Nicole, I'm not just sitting here. I'm moving pieces. She gave him that skeptical look only a sister can. Pieces? What does that mean? He didn't answer, just smiled. You'll see, Nicole sighed, shaking her head. Lord, you've always been like this, keeping things close to your chest. Just don't let pride ruin you, Darius. That's what they want. After she left, Darius sat for a while in the quiet of his kitchen, staring out the frosted window at the woods beyond. Pride? Maybe. But this was more than pride. This was about respect, about not letting anyone erase the traditions his father passed down. The conflict wasn't just in letters or fines. It was in the way the Hoe patrolled the neighborhood like watchmen, their board members puffing out their chests at community meetings. The president, a man named Gregory Allen, had practically made it his personal mission to paint Darius as reckless, dangerous even. At the next Hoe meeting, Gregory's voice rang out sharp. We have a responsibility to protect our community. Allowing illegal hunting near our borders puts our children and families at risk. Imagine if a stray bullet had hit someone. This is why fines exist. This is why rules exist. Darius sat in the back row, quiet, his face unreadable. He watched the nods around the room, the murmurs of agreement. No one mentioned that he'd been hunting with a bow, not a rifle. No one cared to ask. Facts didn't matter when prejudice already decided the verdict. When the meeting ended, Gregory strutted over, his breath visible in the cold air outside. "Mr. Carter," he said, his smile tight. "I trust you received our letter. If payment isn't made within 2 weeks, we'll have no choice but to escalate legally." Darius looked him dead in the eye. "You enjoy this, don't you?" Gregory blinked, feigning innocence. "Enforcing rules? It's my duty." "No," Darius said, his voice low and steady. "You enjoy thinking you can put me in my place." Gregory's jaw tightened. For a split second, his polished facade cracked. "This has nothing to do with," Darius cut him off. "Save it. I know exactly what this is. And I promise you, you don't even see the full board yet. Just the pawns." Then he walked away, leaving Gregory standing there, fuming in the icy air. The conflict spread like wildfire after that. Some neighbors openly avoided him. Others whispered louder, emboldened by Gregory's stance. At the grocery store, Darius caught 2 men chuckling near the produce aisle. "Guess he thinks he's Daniel Boone," one said, loud enough for him to hear. The other replied, "Nah, more like a poacher who can't follow rules." Darius ignored them, but inside, his resolve hardened like steel. Meanwhile, the hoe began doubling down. They sent notices about his lawn not being up to standard, even though it was neatly trimmed. They claimed his trash bins were left out too long, though every neighbor did the same. It was harassment disguised as bureaucracy, and Darius knew it. What they didn't know was that while they were busy stacking paper against him, he was stacking something far more powerful: deeds, contracts, ownership. One evening, as snow fell quietly outside, Darius sat at his desk staring at the manila folder in front of him. Inside were the documents proving his purchase of the land, the very land the hoe held up as the crown jewel of their community. The hiking trails, the yoga lawns, the picnic spots. It all belonged to him now. But he didn't just want to own it. He wanted to make sure they felt the weight of what they'd tried to do to him. The conflict had started with a fine, but by the time he was done, it was going to end with something far bigger. As he leaned back, closing the folder, his phone buzzed with a text. It was from Nicole. "You okay? Heard they might be filing in court soon." Darius typed back, "Let them. I'm ready." He hit send, then looked back out into the snow-covered woods. His father's voice echoed in his mind, steady and patient. "Son, the quiet hunter always wins. Because by the time they hear you, it's already too late." Darius smiled faintly. The game was just getting started. By February, the tension in the neighborhood felt like it could snap. The hoe had moved from nasty letters to filing a formal complaint in county court. They weren't just after Darius's money anymore. They wanted to make an example out of him. The notice came by certified mail, bold letters across the top. Carter versus Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Darius sat at his kitchen table, reading the pages with a slow, steady breath. His dog, Scout, a black lab with graying fur around the muzzle, laid at his feet, sensing the shift in his master's mood. Nicole showed up later that evening, storming through the door like a gust of wind. "You didn't tell me they filed, D," she said, slapping the papers onto the counter. "You're about to be dragged into court, and you're sitting here like it's Sunday dinner?" Darius smirked, pouring himself a glass of water. "Court's just another room, Nicole. I've been in tougher." She folded her arms, glaring. "Don't play cool with me. You think they'll stop at a fine? This is about driving you out. They want you gone." For a moment, Darius didn't respond. He just stared out the window at the snowy woods, his reflection faint in the glass. "Then they're about to find out I don't scare easy." Nicole shook her head in disbelief. "I swear, one day you're gonna explain what's going on in that head of yours." The court date was set for March. Until then, the hoe doubled its efforts to turn the community against him. Flyers appeared on bulletin boards warning about reckless hunting practices endangering families. A neighborhood email chain suggested Darius was aggressive and uncooperative. He noticed the subtle changes everywhere. Parents pulling their kids closer when you walked past. Conversations that went silent when he entered the coffee shop. Even at church, where he'd sat in the same pew for years, people now shifted uncomfortably beside him. The pressure was real, but Darius refused to let it break him. Instead, he poured his energy into quiet moves behind the scenes. Each week, he met with his lawyer, going over deed transfers and land surveys. Each signature was a nail in the coffin of the HOA's arrogance. Still, there were moments when the weight pressed hard. One night, after a particularly long meeting with his attorney, Darius drove out to the land. He parked by the trailhead, where the hoe had posted a bright green sign, Willow Creek Community Trail, hoe maintained. He stood there under the moonlight, the woods stretching dark and endless before him. He remembered walking this same path as a boy with his father, learning how to move silently, how to notice the world breathing around him. Back then, the land had felt alive, sacred. Now it felt stolen, wrapped in someone else's rules. He knelt down, running his hand across the frozen earth. "Not for long," he whispered. The next morning, he returned with Scout at his side. They hiked deep into the woods, past the jogging loops and picnic tables the hoe prided itself on. He paused at a ridge where the trees opened up, revealing a wide view of the valley below. He could almost hear his father's voice. "This land isn't theirs to control, son. It belongs to whoever respects it." Darius clenched his jaw, his decision firm. He wasn't just buying the land to spite them. He was reclaiming something sacred that had been dismissed, disrespected, and weaponized against him. Back in town, the conflict boiled hotter. Gregory Allen, the hoe president, was everywhere. Interviews in the community newsletter, loud speeches at meetings, even talking to local reporters. "This is about safety," he insisted, his words polished, but his smirk betraying the truth. "We cannot allow one man to disregard the rules that protect us all." Darius didn't bother responding publicly. He let Gregory build his stage, pile up his arguments, stir the crowd, let them think he was cornered. Because the quieter he stayed, the bigger the shock would be when he finally spoke. By late February, whispers had turned into open hostility. A neighbor confronted him in the driveway one evening. "Why don't you just pay the fine and move on? You're tearing this place apart." Darius met his eyes calmly. "I didn't tear anything. They did, when they decided tradition and respect don't count for people like me." The man flushed, muttering, always playing the victim, before walking off. Later, Nicole called again. "I'm serious, Darius. This is getting ugly. Folks acting like you're some kind of menace. Even Mama's old customers are talking." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm not fighting back with words. They wouldn't hear him anyway." "Then how?" she pressed. He paused, then smiled faintly. "You'll see soon enough." The court hearing finally came on a gray March morning. The small courtroom buzzed with townsfolk eager to watch. Gregory strutted in with his lawyers, confident, already smiling as if victory was inevitable. Darius arrived in a simple suit, his lawyer at his side, his expression calm. He didn't speak much during the proceedings. He didn't need to. The whole lawyers laid out their case. Safety concerns, rule violations, precedent for fines. The judge listened, scribbling notes. When it was his lawyer's turn, the defense was steady, measured. They highlighted that no rule had been broken, that no one had been harmed, that the safety argument was speculation at best. The judge nodded along, unimpressed with the HOA's theatrics. Still, it was clear this wasn't just about the letter of the law. It was about perception. And in that room, perception had already been poisoned. When the judge announced a ruling in favor of the hoe, ordering Darius to pay the fine plus court fees, the crowd murmured approval. Gregory grinned wide, shaking hands like he'd just won a championship. Darius, though, didn't flinch. He simply rose, buttoned his coat, and walked out. Outside, reporters called after him, microphones shoved in his face. Mr. Carter, do you have a statement? He stopped at the courthouse steps, looking directly into one of the cameras. His deep voice carried, steady and sure. They think this is the end, but the land doesn't belong to them, and soon enough, everybody's gonna know it. Then he walked away, leaving the crowd buzzing, Gregory frowning, and Nicole staring at him in shock. That night, as snow began to melt into early spring mud, Darius sat at his desk again, flipping through the manila folder. The deeds, the surveys, the ownership transfer, it was all there. The land was his. And now, after months of humiliation and harassment, he was finally ready to let them see the truth. The tension had peaked. The storm was ready to break. The court ruling should have been the end of it. At least, that's what the whole believed. Gregory Allen strutted through the neighborhood like a man who had conquered something, waving to neighbors, bragging about protecting the community. His words always carried that subtle sting, protecting us from him. But Darius didn't pay the fine. Not right away. Instead, he let the notices pile up. Certified letters, threats of liens, each envelope stacked neatly on his kitchen counter, unopened. He wasn't ignoring them. He was collecting them, like trophies. Word spread quickly. By April, neighbors whispered that the Ho might seize his property. Some cheered at the thought. Others shook their heads, uneasy about how far things had gone. Meanwhile, Darius stayed calm. He still walked scout in the mornings, still drove his old truck into town for groceries, still nodded politely at the folks who glared at him. What none of them saw were the late nights, the quiet phone calls with his lawyer, the steady stream of documents passing hands, the final details being locked in. Nicole wasn't fooled. One evening, she showed up with a casserole, storming into his kitchen like she owned the place. Darius, I swear, you're about to give me gray hair. Do you even care what they're saying about you? Folks think you're broke, think you're about to lose the house. He smirked, pouring her a glass of sweet tea. Let him think it. She sat across from him, exasperated. This isn't funny. They're painting you like some reckless outlaw. You gonna sit here while Gregory runs his mouth all over town? Darius leaned forward, his eyes steady. Nicole, you remember when Dad used to take us hunting? How he'd say the deer never see the arrow coming until it's already too late. Her brow furrowed. Yeah, that's me right now, he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment, then shook her head with a half smile. Lord, you and your secrets. Fine, but if this blows up, don't expect me to clean up the mess. But inside, a part of her believed him. He had that same calm their father used to carry, the kind that meant something bigger was in motion. As spring came, the Ho ramped up its campaign. They posted new signs at the trailheads. Community property, protected by Ho regulations. They sent mass emails boasting about their victory in court. Gregory even held a press event with a local reporter, standing proudly in front of the trail entrance. This is a win for safety, for rules, for the kind of community we all want to raise our children in. Darius watched the segment on the local news, his lips curling into a faint smile. Safety, rules, community, they really believed their words had power. The next morning, he drove out to the trailhead early, before sunrise. The air was cool, the grass wet with dew. He walked slowly along the path, Scout trotting beside him. Every step he took, he imagined Gregory and his joggers, the yoga moms with their mats, the kids on bikes. They thought this was theirs. They had no idea they were trespassing on his. As the sun broke through the trees, Darius stopped at a large oak that marked the halfway point of the trail. He pulled a small wooden stake from his backpack and pressed it firmly into the ground. On it, in bold red letters, he had painted a simple word, private. It was just one sign, a quiet test. By noon, the neighborhood buzzed. A group of joggers spotted it and immediately called Gregory. That evening, the Ho sent out a furious email to the entire community. Unauthorized signage has been discovered on Ho land. Acts of vandalism will not be tolerated. Darius chuckled when he read it. He hadn't vandalized anything. He had marked what was his. The next day, He added 2 more signs, one at the trailhead, another at the picnic grove. By the end of the week, a half-dozen bright red private property markers dotted the woods. Neighbors were outraged. Some tore the signs down. Others demanded Gregory take action. "He's mocking us," one woman snapped at the next meeting. "You said the court settled this. Why is he still doing whatever he wants?" Gregory, red-faced, promised swift retaliation. "We will not be intimidated," he declared. "The board will handle this." But even as he spoke, doubt began to creep into the crowd. What if Darius wasn't bluffing? What if he really had some claim? The escalation reached a boiling point one Saturday morning. A group of hikers found the trailhead chained shut with a heavy padlock. A new sign hung from it: "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." Phones buzzed. Social media lit up. By the afternoon, everyone in Willow Creek was talking. Some were furious, demanding the police be called. Others hesitated, unsure what legal ground the hoe truly stood on. Gregory wasted no time. He marched straight to Darius's front door, 2 board members at his side. He pounded on the door until Darius opened it, Scout rolling low behind him. "What is the meaning of this?" Gregory demanded, waving a photo of the chain trail. "You can't just shut down community land." Darius leaned casually against the doorframe, unbothered. "Community land? That's funny. Last I checked, that land don't belong to the hoe anymore." The board members exchanged startled looks. Gregory scoffed, forcing a laugh. "You expect us to believe that?" Darius stepped forward, his eyes locked on Gregory's. "Believe it, or wait until the paperwork arrives. Either way, your little playground's closed." Gregory's smug grin faltered for the first time. You're bluffing." Darius tilted his head, his voice calm but cutting. "Am I?" Then he closed the door in their faces. The neighborhood was in chaos within days. Parents complained their kids had nowhere to ride bikes. Yoga classes were canceled. Joggers had to circle the block instead of escaping into the woods. Every inconvenience made the residents angrier, not at Darius, but at the hoe that had promised them control. Gregory scrambled, sending more emails, calling emergency meetings, even contacting the county. But every answer came back the same. If Darius truly held the deed, there was nothing they could do. And deep down, Gregory knew. The look in Darius's eyes hadn't been bluff. The hunter was done waiting. The arrows were already flying. The hoe had called an emergency town hall meeting, the biggest turnout Willow Creek had seen in years. Folding chairs filled the community center gym, neighbors buzzing, voices raised, tension thick in the air. Some came furious about the locked trails. Others came desperate for answers. Everyone wanted to see how Gregory Allen would handle the chaos he swore he had under control. Gregory stood at the front of the room, red-faced and sweaty under the fluorescent lights. He banged the gavel on the table until the noise died down. "Thank you all for coming. I want to assure you, this situation is temporary. The signs, the padlocks, the intimidation tactics, none of it is legal. The hoe owns those trails, and we will restore access immediately." A murmur of uneasy agreement rippled through the crowd. From the back row, a deep voice cut through. "That's a lie." Heads turned. Darius Carter rose slowly to his feet, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the rows. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The calm weight of his words carried through the room. "The hoe doesn't own those trails. I do." Gasps and whispers filled the air. Some laughed nervously. Others exchanged confused looks. Gregory's face flushed bright red. "This man is trespassing, vandalizing, threatening our community. He doesn't own a thing." Darius walked forward, each step deliberate, his boots echoing on the gym floor. He carried a manila folder under his arm, the same one that had sat on his desk for months. Reaching the front, he set it down on the table with a solid thud. "Deeds, contracts, land surveys," he said calmly, flipping the folder open. He slid the papers across the table toward Gregory. "The land you've been leasing for your trails and yoga classes? Bought it months ago. It's mine now." The room erupted. Shouts, gasps, questions all colliding at once. Some demanded to see the papers. Others turned to Gregory, searching his face for reassurance. Gregory fumbled through the documents, his hands shaking. The county stamps were there, the signatures, the transfer of ownership. It was all airtight. He looked up, stammering, This can't be. It can. Darius interrupted, his voice steady. He turned toward the crowd. You fined me for hunting on land my family's used for generations. You tried to humiliate me, paint me like I was dangerous, reckless, like I didn't belong here. But while you were busy harassing me, I was busy buying the ground beneath your feet. The room went silent. Darius let his eyes sweep across the crowd, landing on the neighbors who'd whispered, who'd laughed, who'd pulled their kids away when he walked by. You thought rules made you powerful, but rules don't mean a thing when you don't own the land. From the second row, a woman raised her hand timidly. So what happens now? Does this mean the trails are closed? Darius nodded once. Closed. Permanently. Chaos exploded again. Parents shouted about their kids. Joggers groaned. A man in the back yelled, You can't do that. Yes, I can, Darius said simply. Because it's mine. And if there's one thing my father taught me, it's that when people don't respect the land doesn't owe them anything back. Gregory slammed his fist on the table, desperate to salvage control. You're tearing apart the community. This is selfish, vindictive. This is justice. Darius cut in sharply, his eyes locked on Gregory. You wanted to teach me a lesson with your fines, your rules, your lies. Well, here's the lesson. Never mistake quiet dignity for weakness. The crowd murmured, torn between outrage and awe. For the first time, Gregory looked small, cornered, his authority crumbling under the weight of the truth. Nicole, sitting near the back, watched her brother with wide eyes. She'd known he was planning something, but not this, not the sheer finality of it. When their eyes met across the room, she saw the flicker of pain behind his calm expression. He wasn't celebrating. He was carrying out something heavy, something born out of being pushed too far. Gregory tried one last time. You'll regret this, Carter. You'll isolate yourself. No one will side with you. Darius leaned closer, his voice low, but firm enough for everyone to hear. I didn't move here to be liked. I moved here to live, and I'll live on my terms, not yours. He gathered the papers back into the folder, tucked it under his arm, and turned to leave. The crowd parted in silence as he walked toward the doors, Scout waiting loyally outside. The gavel Gregory slammed in frustration echoed behind him, but it no longer carried any weight. That night, the entire neighborhood buzzed. Some were furious, calling Darius vindictive. Others admired the audacity, secretly relieved someone had finally stood up to the HOA's bullying. And a few, quietly, cautiously, began to question why they had ever sided with Gregory at all. Darius sat on his porch, the cool spring night wrapping around him, Scout's head resting on his boot. He looked out at the woods, no longer just a battlefield of rules and fines, but truly his father's land, his legacy. For the first time in months, he felt the knot in his chest loosen, but he also knew this wasn't the end. The reveal was only the turning point. The real consequences, for Gregory, for the hope, for the neighbors who turned their backs, were still coming. The hunter had revealed himself. Now the chase had truly begun. Politely now whispered behind curtains. Joggers who used to wave at each other on the trails were left circling the paved sidewalks, grumbling about the locked gates. Parents scrambled to adjust weekend plans without the picnic groves they'd grown used to. And at the center of it all was Darius Carter. The news spread fast, faster than anyone expected. By noon, a local paper had run the story. Ho president humiliated after black resident buys land, shuts down trails. The headline was blunt, the article even sharper. Reporters painted Gregory as arrogant, the Ho as overreaching, and Darius as a quiet man who turned the tables. By evening, Gregory's phone was buzzing nonstop. Angry emails from board members, furious calls from parents. Even county officials wanted to know how an entire neighborhood had been blindsided. At one point, his wife slammed a glass of wine on the counter and shouted, "You promised everyone you had this under control." Gregory rubbed his temples, exhausted. It was supposed to be simple. Find him, shut him down, move on. "Well, now look what you've done," she snapped. "You turned him into a headline." Across town, Darius sat with Nicole at his kitchen table. She flipped through the newspaper, shaking her head. "I can't believe you pulled this off. The whole town's talking about you." He sipped his coffee slowly, his face unreadable. "Let him talk." Nicole looked at him closely. "So that's it? You're just closing it all down? No room for compromise?" "No." "Renting it back to them?" Darius's eyes flickered. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said quietly, "They didn't want compromise when they dragged me through court. They didn't want compromise when they called me reckless, when they tried to shame me. They wanted control, and now they've lost it." Nicole sighed. "I get it, Dee, I do. But you know they're not gonna just roll over. Gregory's not the type to walk away quietly." Darius gave a faint smile. "Good. I want him loud. The louder he gets, the faster he'll bury himself." And loud Gregory became. Within days, he was on local TV again, red-faced, railing against selfish behavior and vindictive actions. He accused Darius of destroying the community, of using race to play the victim. "This isn't about tradition or justice," Gregory ranted into the microphone. "This is about one man trying to hold an entire neighborhood hostage." But his words didn't land the way they used to. Viewers saw desperation, not authority. Letters to the editor began trickling in, some mocking the hoe, others praising Darius for standing up to a system that had bullied him. One woman wrote, "If the hoe had respected him in the first place, none of this would have happened." They brought this on themselves. The board meetings turned chaotic. Where once Gregory commanded the room, now voices rose against him. "You said he couldn't do this," one father shouted. "You promised the courts were on our side." Another board member muttered bitterly, "Maybe if we hadn't pushed so hard, he wouldn't have gone this far." Gregory pounded the table, desperate. "We can fight this. We can appeal." But even his closest allies avoided his eyes. They were tired of fighting a battle they'd already lost. Meanwhile, Darius walked through his neighborhood with a quiet dignity. Some avoided him, still angry, but others began nodding respectfully, even offering quick words of support. "Didn't agree with how you did it," one man admitted at the grocery store, "but I respect the hell out of the fact you stood your ground." For Darius, it wasn't about admiration. It wasn't about being the hero. It was about making sure no one could ever try to erase him again. Still, in the quiet moments at night, sitting on his porch with Scout at his feet, he felt the weight of it. Shutting down the land didn't just punish Gregory. It punished everyone. The kids, the families, the joggers who hadn't said a cruel word to him. Nicole noticed it too. One evening, she joined him on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "You're carrying a lot, Dee," he exhaled slowly. "It's not easy, but it's necessary." "Maybe," she said softly. "But don't forget, part of our strength is knowing when to protect, not just when to fight." He turned to her, his eyes tired but steady. "You think I don't know that? Every time I hear a kid cry because they can't ride those trails, I feel it. But this isn't about kids. This is about respect. And sometimes, respect don't come cheap." Nicole didn't argue. She knew the wound ran too deep. Across town, Gregory's empire was crumbling. At the next whole election, whispers of a recall filled the air. Even his staunchest supporters were backing away. When the vote came, Gregory was ousted, his gavel handed off to a woman who immediately called for a reset with Darius. But when she reached out with an olive branch, offering to lease the land back from him, even at a premium, Darius declined. "I didn't buy it to make money," he told her. "I bought it to make a point. And until folks here learn that point, the gates stay closed." For the first time, the whole fell silent. They couldn't bully him. They couldn't buy him. They couldn't outmaneuver him. The consequences of his revelation were complete. Gregory was finished. the whole humbled, and the neighborhood forced to reckon with what they'd done. Still, late at night, as the cicadas buzzed and the woods stood quiet, Darius sometimes found himself staring out at the trees, asking silently if this was the justice his father would have wanted. The land was his. The fight was over, but the story of what came next was just beginning. By summer, Willow Creek wasn't the same neighborhood anymore. The trails that had once bustled with joggers and families now lay silent, weeds curling up through the gravel paths, the wooden benches splintering under the sun. What used to be the heart of the community now looked like a ghost of itself. Some neighbors grew bitter. They avoided Darius altogether, whispering angrily when he passed by. Petty. One woman muttered loud enough for him to hear as she yanked her child away from the sidewalk. He ruined this place out of spite. Others, though, had started to see the bigger picture. At cookouts, in quiet conversations at church, the story shifted. If the hoe hadn't gone after him, one man said, we'd still have the trails. They poked the wrong bear. But whether they blamed him or defended him, one thing was clear. Darius Carter had changed Willow Creek forever. It wasn't just the neighborhood either. The story had reached beyond the county, picked up by larger outlets. Online blogs ran headlines like, Black homeowner outsmarts hoe with historic land buy. On social media, clips of his words at the town hall circulated. Never mistake quiet dignity for weakness. People called him a hero, a symbol of resistance against overreaching HOAs. Darius wasn't chasing attention, but it found him anyway. Reporters knocked on his door. Strangers sent letters thanking him for standing up. One afternoon, an older man stopped him outside the hardware store and gripped his hand. My hoe tried to run me out years ago. I didn't fight back. Should've. Wish I had your strength, son. Darius nodded, humbled, but inside he carried a quiet heaviness. Strength was lonely. Nicole saw it. One evening, she came over with barbecue from their cousin's place and found him sitting on the porch again, Scout at his feet. You know, she said as she handed him a plate, folks out there are calling you a hero. But here, half of them call you the devil. Darius gave a short laugh, shaking his head. Ain't that something? She studied him closely. So, what now? You just let the trails rot? Let the whole neighborhood stew forever? He chewed slowly, staring out at the fading sunset. It's not about rotting, Nick. It's about reminding. Every time they drive by those locked gates, they remember what happens when they try to strip a man of his dignity. Nicole leaned back in her chair. Yeah, but at some point, dignity shouldn't taste this bitter. Her words stuck with him. That night, lying in bed, he replayed the last year in his mind. The fine, the court case, the humiliation, the reveal. He had won. No one could take that from him. But as much as victory filled him with pride, there was an emptiness too. Justice had been served, yes. But peace? That was still out of reach. The fallout spread further when Gregory, humiliated and bitter, began giving interviews on radio shows, portraying himself as the victim. This man destroyed a community just to get revenge, he snarled. And people are praising him for it. It's madness. But his words rang hollow. Too many people remembered how aggressively he pushed the fines, how smug he'd been before the reveal. Still, a few angry residents rallied around him, demanding the county intervene. Petitions circulated. Legal inquiries were filed. But each time, the same answer came back. The land belonged to Darius. The law was clear. So the whole grew quiet, beaten, powerless. Yet that silence only made the divide sharper. Neighborhood barbecues had fewer people. Community events fizzled out. The spirit of Willow Creek, once so proud, was fractured beyond repair. One Saturday, as Darius fixed the fence in his backyard, a boy from down the street rode up on his bike. He stopped nervously at the edge of the yard, kicking at the dirt. Mr. Carter? Darius wiped his hands on his jeans. Yes, son? Me and my friends. We used to ride on the trails. Since they're closed, we just ride circles in the street. But the boy trailed off, eyes downcast. Darius's chest tightened. The boy hadn't accused him, hadn't called him selfish, Just a simple, honest hurt. He crouched down so they were eye level. I know it's hard, but sometimes grown folks gotta teach lessons that kids shouldn't have to carry. And this is one of those times. The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight in the man's voice. He pedaled off slowly, leaving Darius staring at the trees in the distance. That night, he told Nicole about it. The kid didn't blame me. He just missed the woods. And for a second, I wanted to give it all back. Nicole reached across the table, resting her hand on his. You've already given enough. You carried the weight for all of us. Dad would have been proud. He didn't reply. But in the quiet, he let her words settle like balm over the ache he didn't admit out loud. By late summer, the community had accepted a new reality. The trails were gone. Gregory was disgraced. And Darius, whether loved or hated, was a permanent fixture of Willow Creek's story. Yet even as the dust settled, one thing was clear. This wasn't just about trails anymore. It was about power, about dignity, about a man who had been underestimated, disrespected, and pushed too far, and who had shown the world exactly who he was. The fallout was real, the silence heavy, but in that silence, something else was stirring, a new sense of who held the reins now, and that knowledge gave Darius a quiet kind of peace. Even as the neighborhood struggled with its loss, the cicadas sang heavy in the late August heat, filling the nights with their endless chorus. Darius sat on his porch, a cold drink sweating in his hand, Scout stretched out by his feet. The woods beyond were dark and still, the locked trailhead silent like old monuments. It should have felt like peace. He had won. He'd beaten the hoe at their own game, exposed Gregory for the fraud he was, reclaimed the land his father once walked. But some nights, as the air hung thick and heavy, victory felt hollow. Nicole stopped by often, usually with food, sometimes with questions she knew he wouldn't answer. One evening, she leaned on the porch railing beside him, sipping sweet tea. So, tell me the truth, Dee, she said softly. Are you happy? You got what you wanted. You showed him. You proved your point. But are you happy? He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the tree line, the faint outline of the trails barely visible in the moonlight. Happy ain't the word, he finally said. Satisfied, maybe. Respected, finally. But happy? He shook his head slowly. Happy's harder to come by. Nicole studied him. Because of the kids? Because of the kids, he admitted, his voice low. Every time I see one riding circles in the street, I think of me and Dad, walking those trails before sunrise. Hunting wasn't just about meat. It was about learning the land, learning patience. And now I wonder if I've taken that away from them too. Nicole's eyes softened. You didn't take it, Dee. You reminded them what happens when people stop respecting each other. They lost this, not you. He wanted to believe her, but deep down, the weight lingered. The emotional strain showed in smaller ways too. At the grocery store, a mother clutched her daughter's hand tighter when Darius walked past. In town, a group of teenagers whispered, "That's him," with a mix of awe and resentment. At church, the pastor's sermon about forgiveness seemed aimed straight at him. Darius carried it all with quiet dignity. But alone at night, he'd stare out at the stars, hearing his father's voice in the wind. Son, power without peace is just another kind of prison. One Saturday morning, as the sun rose over the valley, Darius drove out to the trailhead. He unlocked the heavy chain and walked slowly down the path, Scout padding beside him. The forest smelled of dew and pine, the same smell he'd grown up with. He stopped at the oak ridge where he and his father had once sat for hours, waiting in silence. He sat down on the fallen log, breathing in the stillness. For the first time since the fight began, he let the tears come. They weren't tears of regret or guilt. They were tears of release. Months of carrying the weight, months of anger and defiance, months of standing tall when everyone wanted him small. The woods held it all, quiet and steady, like they always had. When he finally rose, his chest felt lighter. He whispered to the trees, "I kept it safe, Dad. I kept us safe." Later that day, Nicole found him fixing the fence out back. "You disappeared this morning," she said. "Just needed to walk," he replied simply. She gave him a knowing smile. "I can see it in your face. You look different. Lighter." He nodded. "I let it go, Nick. Not the fight. I'll never let them take what's ours again. But the weight? I left that in the woods." Nicole touched his arm gently. "Good. You deserve peace as much as justice." And slowly, peace did begin to creep in. Neighbors still avoided him, but some began softening. A man who had once mocked him stopped by with a box of fresh peaches from his garden. "Figured you might like these," he said awkwardly. Jarius accepted them with a simple, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. One evening, as he sat on the porch, the boy from earlier, the one who had missed riding the trails, rode up again. He stopped, shy as before. "Mr. Carter, my dad says what you did was wrong, but my grandma says it was brave." Jarius smiled faintly. "What do you think?" The boy hesitated, then said quietly, "I think it was both." Jarius chuckled, shaking his head. "Smart kid." He reached into the box of peaches on the table and handed one over. "Take that with you. And remember, sometimes the world ain't simple. Sometimes doing right feels wrong to other folks. But you gotta stand anyway." The boy nodded solemnly, took the peach, and rode off. Jarius leaned back in his chair, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and pink. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. Not because the world had forgiven him, not because the neighborhood had healed, but because he knew he had done what needed to be done. The trails might stay closed, the whispers might never stop, but dignity had a price, and he had paid it in full. And sitting there in the fading light, with scouts snoring at his feet and the woods standing tall behind him, Jarius Carter finally allowed himself to breathe. September rolled in with crisp mornings and golden leaves, the kind of season that usually brought neighbors out for fall festivals and trail hikes. But Willow Creek felt hollow. The trails were still locked, the picnic groves quiet. People muttered about the good old days, when they had free run of the woods, forgetting or ignoring how those days had ended. Jarius noticed the change, but for once, it didn't weigh him down. After months of carrying the fight like a burden, something inside him had shifted. The weight wasn't